Good evening, everyone. Welcome, 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 welcome. People are filtering in. Thank you so much for spending your evening with me. Welcome, everybody, as you're joining us. Time to relax and kick back. Going to have a great hour of art together. Welcome to everybody filtering in. Really happy you chose to spend your evening with me. We're in for a treat. I'd say that every month, don't I? We still have a few people trickling in, and it looks like some people are checking in from where they are. I always love to hear and see where people are. So please feel free to share where in the world you're zooming in from. I'm in Manchester, New Hampshire, and it's great. Oh, Nancy Parker's here. Nancy, so glad you could join us. All right. Well, we've got an interesting array already. Charleston, South Carolina, New York City. Leslie, I recognize that name from New York City. Seattle, Philly. We're national. This is great. And Janine is here. Hi, Janine. Thank you so much for being here and for all that you do. All right, we've got a great group here, a lot of locals and a lot of people scattered throughout the country. This feels like a really nice coming together of people at the holidays. And I know that everybody here loves the arts, and it's just great to have this little arts loving community, spend a little time together before everybody goes into vacation mode. And really tonight is about setting the stage, feeling festive. I guarantee you like 10% increase in holiday cheer by the end of the hour. So thank you everybody for continuing to share where you're from. I love this list. And Frank is here tonight. Thanks for being here. Ooh, several people from California. Sharon from Camden. Thank you all for being here. Mary Zoll was here from Carlisle. Great to see your name here too. And let's see here. I think we can just about get started. Um, let's see here. I'm just going to close out this tab here. And I think I might be getting a message from somebody at the library tonight that is reminding me maybe just to plug some upcoming Zooms. And that is to say that I'm very happy that we will continue on with this partnership into the new year. So next month you can look for those calendar listings at your favorite library, whether it's Chelmsford or Amesbury or Groton, Tewksbury or Ashland. We will be covering Caravaggio next month, and I believe that's on the 30th. So mark your calendars now. You won't have to go without art for too long. Okay, so let's get started thinking about snowy scapes and celebrations, the artist's holiday. So today's program, like I said, is sure to make you feel just a little bit more festive. We're going to be looking at some of the very cold, wintry landscapes that have been painted throughout the history of art, as well as some very heartwarming scenes of family gatherings, like the one that we have here on the screen. And just to set the stage for us tonight, we will be getting back to this Norman Rockwell that we have up here. It's one of my favorites. But I wanted to share these two images. These are by an artist named Ed Wheeler, who over the past few years just started dressing up as Santa and photoshopping himself into these famous paintings. Here he is decorating the cypress tree in Van Gogh's Starry Night, and then adding a few Christmas lights over here to Monet's Japanese Bridge. It's lighthearted, it's fun, and hopefully that's what tonight will be too. But tonight is also going to be this kind of interesting mix between high and low art. We're going to be looking at works of art that are in some of the world's greatest museums, and then also works that were created for magazine covers and for cards and for commercial purposes. So all of it is combined again to get us feeling festive. And by the way, you can find more of these images of Ed Wheeler in a Santa suit if you just Google his name online. You can even see him doing Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and he is wearing the Santa suit for that one. There's no nudity. Okay, so let's get started here with our program overview. And I just have to preface this by saying this year in particular for me, the Christmas carols have just like loomed very large in my consciousness. And there's something about those songs that help to shape the way I think the holiday season is supposed to look. So as I was thinking about the different sections tonight, everything turned into a song. So we're going to be thinking about winter landscapes, the history of them in art. It's walking through a winter wonderland. When I think of the Wyeth family of artists, I think of these like quiet scenes. We're going to do Silent Night. Norman Rockwell obviously can keep things merry and bright for us, and nobody paints a sleigh dashing through the snow like Grandma Moses. We'll round things out with a couple of examples of 20th century holiday Christmas cards, which I think is really interesting. It's fascinating to see what they would give their friends and loved ones, and then also cards that they produce for commercial purposes too. And then, of course, any holiday program has to end with a Happy New Year. So let's get started with walking in a winter wonderland. This is more of our art historical section of the program and sort of gets us into to this time of year, to this season. And let me tell you, there's nothing better than looking at snow in a picture. It is by far much better than actually driving in it or having to shovel it. So wherever you are, just be grateful that there is probably very little snow on the ground and it's safe to get around. So we're starting off early. We're looking at this painting from 1416. This was painted by a set of illustrators known as the Limburg brothers. And this is a very fancy book of hours, a prayer book that would have been held in the palms of your hand. And in this case, we're looking at a calendar page. You can see the sort of calendar function across the top here. And this is actually for the month of February, but it gives us the snowy scape to begin with. And it gets us thinking about this very chilly time of year. So this is a medieval painting, a Gothic painting. So we don't have that sense of linear perspective that you would get in the Renaissance 100 or so years later. Instead, you have this really interesting sense of perspective where things sort of recede into depth at this strong diagonal. Now, there is a hierarchy of scale here. We have this one very large figure that's closest to us. My eye always goes to her, and she's inside this structure. She's sort of lifting up her dress here to warm her feet by this fire. And you can see a little bit of smoke coming out of the chimney up here. So there's a sense of coziness that does bring you into the scene. I'm going to get things spicy right off the bat here and just tell you that these two figures behind that woman in blue are actually exposing themselves. I'll let you zoom in on that on your own. But beyond these figures inside, we have several other figures near this barnyard. We saw this structure where the sheep are being kept. There's some pigeons or doves here, some beehives, and a dovecote. We have this figure on the opposite side in a pink tunic who's really kind of shielding themselves from the cold. Another figure up here keeping himself warm by chopping down some firewood. And then a final figure at the top of the composition who is driving this donkey into the distant town. So overall, it's this wonderful composition that kind of moves our eye around in this nice little arch. And you can sort of sweep across the bottom to the other side too. In many ways, it's echoing that calendar arch that we see along the top there too. But it gives us this little slice of peasant life in the 1400s that's just so remarkable to me. And to think of what an intimate experience it would have been to hold a little picture like this in your hands. Now we're going to contrast that with this next image, possibly the most famous painted image of snow ever. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder's Hunters in the Snow from 1565. This is a massive work. It's monumental. It's about 5 feet across and 4 feet tall. So this isn't about that intimacy. This is a grand sweeping view here. And we have our eponymous hunters right over here on the left. They're coming back from the hunt with this big pack of dogs, and everybody looks dejected. All they got was this one rabbit. But if you have really good eyes, you might be able to see that there are rabbit tracks just right in front of them, sort of adding insult to injury here, right? The one that just got away. So Bruegel creates this sort of pattern, this repetition of these trees coming down the hill here, and our eye sort of moves down that hill, maybe down to this frozen pond. We can see one figure pulling another figure on a sled. There's that great frozen water wheel too. And then you can sort of move underneath these arches over to where everybody is outdoors playing and skating around, young and old, big and small. It looks like there's a lot of fun to be had there. But then we have this sweeping expanse of landscape, eventually going up with these really jagged, like sheer rock cliffs. Bruegel was a Northern European artist, but apparently he did see the Alps at some point in his life, and he sort of carried them back and inserted them into his paintings when it served him well. So we've got these vertiginous cliffs, and then these blackbirds or these magpies kind of bring our eye back to these denuded trees and then down here to the hunters again. So sort of a similar swirling movement of the eye for something like this. And I have to admit that every time I see this picture, I just want to get to those skaters. I want to get to that middle ground, and I want to see all the fun that they're having, the games that they're playing. And lucky for us, we can kind of do that. This next picture gets us right on the ice, painted many years later. This is 1795. The artist here is Henry Raeburn, and the name of the painting is The Skating Minister. This has become sort of an icon for the country of Scotland. It was a work that was passed down through private hands for many years, and then right around mid 20th century, it entered into the collection of the National Gallery, and people have just loved it ever since. Now, in terms of a painted wintry landscape, this is done pretty loosely, right? It's open to suggestion here. This is a sort of gray, kind of pink lavender, loosely painted background, just a vague suggestion of landscape. And then even this bluish ice gets a little bit more crisp and clear as it gets closer to us. We can even see the way ice skates have etched into this ice already. But contrast that to the way that the skater himself has been painted. There's this crispness and clarity, not only to his face, but to his costume. We can see his entirely black wardrobe here. We can see like the knickers and the stockings. We can even see the bow on his skates here. And so we have loosely painted background, crisply painted figure here. And then there's another big contrast, a delightful contrast with this particular painting, because there's a somberness, a seriousness to this figure. I mean, he is wearing all black. It's not like he's smiling. He's a minister after all. But you contrast that to his body and what he's actually doing here, because there's this sense of freedom and fun in his posture and position here. There's a sense of almost like childlike abandon. This is a man who is communing with this frosty landscape and having a great time at it. I keep telling people I was just in Scapes at the beginning of the month for the first time in like 25 years. And let me tell you, it's hard. It was not fun. I did not have I wasn't kicking out my legs behind me like this. So this minister is really, he's in his element, and he is so very much enjoying it. Now, this next image I want to share with you is from a German romantic painter named Caspar David Friedrich, who created many of these kind of moody, mysterious, spiritual pictures from the early years of the 1800s. In this particular one, which is just over the size of like a standard sheet of copy paper, we can see this kind of misty pink background where this German Gothic cathedral rises up sort of out of this mist. And then in the foreground, we have this very thin blanket of snow, this dusting that has covered everything. And we see these three evergreen trees, three being an important number here, referring to the Trinity, sort of correlating to the spires on top of the church. And you might have noticed that there is at the base of this tallest evergreen wooden crucifix. It's very tall, even for the human scale here. And we do have a tiny little figure. He's sitting in front of that crucifix, leaning up against this boulder, sitting in the snow. And we can see that he's even cast aside his little crutches here. So he's somebody who needs help. He's somebody who needs healing. And instead of going into that church, he has gone out in the cold and in the dampness to to a different kind of temple, right? It's like the temple to God out in nature. And he's seeking hope here in this space, this beautiful space that Friedrich has conjured for us. Now we're going to contrast the hope that you might feel suggested in this picture with one more work by Caspar David Friedrich. And let me tell you, it's a really different feeling. This is a much bigger painting. It's about 4 feet across, 3 feet tall, and it's called The Sea of Ice from 1824. It is a picture that is disorienting, really, to look at it. We are looking at these very thick sheets of ice. This is the surface of the ocean up in the polar north. And right around this time, there were all of these expeditions out of Europe and North America that were really interested in exploring the North Pole and finding passages. And it was a perilous thing to do because these ships would get stuck in the ice, and they were without luck. There is no way to escape from it. And we see that there's a ship over here on the right that is in exactly that condition. It's been capsized, I'm sure. All the souls aboard were lost. So here we have this jagged, sort of mountain-like formation in this desolate landscape, this deserted landscape, this extremely icy, frosty, but awe-inspiring landscape. I should mention too that something like this would have looked almost abstract to contemporary audiences. This is without any of the usual markers that you would see in a landscape painting. So I'm sure there were many people who just didn't quite know what to make of something like this, but it certainly sets the mood, doesn't it? Now we're going to travel to America for this next work. This is by the artist Winslow Homer, and it's called "The Fox in the Fox Hunt." And many art historians think of this really dramatic picture as being important to understanding the artist himself. So we'll talk a little bit about Winslow Homer just for a moment. He's generally considered America's greatest painter from the 19th century. He really made a name for himself during the Civil War, traveling down south afterwards and painting Reconstruction. And then shortly after that, just before he turned 50 years old, he decided to kind of turn his back on society and moved to Scarborough, Maine, and just set himself up with a studio that faced the ocean. And he made that his primary subject from that point forward, with really very little interest in socializing beyond that. So here we have this fox in the snow, right there on the Maine coast, just like the artist himself. We can see that this fox is probably desperately hungry. There's not much to eat here, and there's very few places for him to escape to, because of course he is being well, hounded and sort of followed, pursued by this group of crows or blackbirds. I believe they're referred to as like a murder of crows, right? And so we just see this striking figure of the fox kind of darting across the snow here and kind of simultaneously sinking into it. So art historians, based on what we know about Winslow Homer, is that he shared a lot of qualities with a fox. He was sort of elegant, he was small, he was shrewd, he was dapper, he was inquisitive. And just like a fox in a Maine winter, I mean, he had to figure out how he as an artist was going to survive. There's a sense of adaptability with a fox that I think he might have really admired. Now, there's one last important element here. It's the way Homer signed this picture. We can see his signature at the bottom, and he has painted his own name sinking into the snow, just like the figure of that fox is sinking into the snow. And what's more, the end of that letter R sort of has this flourish on it. It sort of looks like the fox's tail, doesn't it? So there's a lot that he's doing here to kind of align himself with this animal in this desperate situation. Now, I have just two last pictures for you about snowy landscapes before we start turning our attention to the more commercial works. And now we're in the 20th century, and we're looking at a fairly early work by the abstract painter Vasily Kandinsky. This is before he goes fully non-objective. And here he's thinking about how to paint a landscape blanketed in snow without just relying on pure white. He's come up with a great innovation here. He's like faceted the light and refracted it through each individual snowflake almost. So he gives us all of these wild colors. There's purples and lavenders and blues and greens and yellows here in the snow. It almost feels like a disco ball. There's so much like beautiful energy and vitality to this picture. And at the same time, it still gives the illusion of being an actual landscape blanketed in snow, maybe with like the sun just setting behind these mountains here. The colors are gorgeous. And he's given us this great innovation. Now, the last picture I'm going to share with you from this section is a familiar artist, Maxfield Parrish, who was an illustrator and one of the most successful illustrators of the 20th century. We know that in the final decades of his career, he preferred to really just paint the New Hampshire landscape. So that's what he's given us here in a 1949 painting called Christmas Morning. And in this picture, just take a look at how he's painted this hill of snow here in the foreground. He's basically bathed it in this amethyst light, or maybe it's shadow. What we see here is these rocks, this massive tree here. Everything has this sort of lovely lavender tinge on it. It's really just beautiful. So we are kind of forced to think about how we get across this landscape in order to get to this yellow house in the distance. We can see that there are lights on and a little bit of smoke coming out of the chimney. That's our destination. That's where we want to be on Christmas morning. And Parrish sort of sets up this little obstacle course for us to get there. The colors are just gorgeous, though, aren't they? So with that, we'll turn our attention to illustrators now. Maxfield Parrish is a good segue that way. So let's turn our attention fully to the Wyeth family of artists, the section that I call here Silent Night. Now, it is the patriarch of this family who is really the illustrator here. So he's our good segue, and we see him here in a self-portrait from 1918, sort of smiling out at us. He's actually wearing a knitted stocking cap that his grandmother had made for him, and this kind of plaid scarf around his neck. And he's sitting in front of a blank canvas, which I think is an interesting choice on the part of the artist. I think in this case, he's kind of using it to suggest a wintry landscape, right? There's a blizzard behind him. He's ready for Christmas. And we'll talk in a little bit about just how much this man loved to celebrate Christmas. But I think he also appreciated the way that snow can transform a familiar landscape. And he gives that to us in this picture over here called Snowbound. This is a familiar scene to so many of us in New England, right? We'll be doing this in the next few weeks, I'm sure, digging out after a snowstorm. And it can be a multi-generational endeavor like we see here. In this case, the older gentleman has stopped shoveling in order to just kind of gaze upon this landscape that is newly blanketed in snow and has completely transformed. It looks magical, it looks pristine. And so we are invited to share that gaze. Notice how NCY uses this red scarf here to draw our attention to his face, and how his little cap here just kind of pierces that horizon line. He's connected to nature in a way that Wyeth invites us to be as well. Now, I mentioned that N.C. Wyeth was a man who loved to celebrate the holidays, and we can really see that in some of his commercial illustrations. Here is his painting for the cover of Judge magazine in 1921. Don't you just love that there was a magazine called Judge? I get a kick out of it every time I see it. So in this case, we have this very raucous Santa. This isn't Silent Night at all. You can practically hear him shouting out reindeer names. You can hear the crack of the whip. This is a sleigh that is flying through the air. There's like all these stars or sparkles kind of cascading out behind him. There's a lot of energy to this scene. And so it won't come as a big surprise to know that N.C. Wyeth just went overboard for his 5 children in terms of celebrating Christmas. He wanted to extend the illusion of Santa for as long as he possibly could. And he actually talked about getting up on the roof of his 2-story house and like clomping along in his big boots, ringing bells, and even shouting down the chimney so that all the kids inside would think it was Santa. Then he'd just slide down a ladder and go inside his front door and just, take in the adorable expressions of his children who are standing at the fireplace listening for more. So it's no surprise that N.C. Wyeth brings us right up on the roof with Santa here. That's where he was spending his time. And you can see the Santa that he makes is sort of this strangely proportioned figure. His head seems to be really big for his body. It conveys just how magical Santa is, right? This is an illustration that he did for the cover of the Bulletin of the Best Books of 1932. So it would only make sense that Santa is only delivering books in this scene. I love the sleigh full of books, this like vertiginous stack of books that he has in his hands. He's even dropped a few along the way. And I also love how it looks like he's just going to step into this chimney and just slide right down. There's a lot of confidence there. But the best part of this picture for me is imagining Christmas morning in this snowy landscape, and all you have to do is set a fire and cozy up with a couple of great books. It sounds like a great, relaxing, wonderful way to spend Christmas. So our last picture of Santa from N.C. Wyeth is this one here called Old Chris. This was for the cover of Country Gentleman in 1925. And now we've come down the chimney with Santa and we're inside the house. As we can see from the grandfather clock, it is just after midnight. Not a creature is stirring, although we do see a mouse right up here. Now, as a father of 5, I feel like N.C. Wyeth would have been very aware of just how quiet you have to be on Christmas night. Otherwise, kids are getting up out of their beds, they're coming to explore, and maybe in this scene, this Santa has sort of heard something or seen something. He's looking backwards over his shoulder, and he's raised that one finger as if to say, silence or go back or something. There's an admonishment there, I think. So we've got this over life-size Santa, this big bulbous nose again, and maybe a little bit of that sense of quiet here in this picture as well. Now, N.C. Wyeth really loved great literature, great art. And so oftentimes we see him marrying the subject of Christmas with those other passions of his. This is a panoramic painting that he did about 6 feet long. Believe it or not, he painted the scene of Christmas in Old Virginia for a packaging for a sock company. It's so hard to imagine this scene wrapped around your socks. But in this case, he is thinking, well, he's painted Mount Vernon, George Washington's plantation, and he's imagined what Christmas might look like there, this giant evergreen that's been cut down, people celebrating, bringing it back, men over here, raising their tri-corner hats, and then there's George and Martha right at the center at the front door, there to receive this giant tree. Now, for N.C. Wyeth, I think there's a little bit of invention here because I'm not sure Virginia gets this much snow in December. And I also know that most of our Christmas traditions in America weren't really solidified for like another 100 years after the revolution. So this is a little bit of fantasy, but it's N.C. Wyeth kind of marrying Christmas history with US history here, and it won't be the last time we see something like that. In this last work by N.C. Wyeth, we can see him kind of looking back to his role model in the world of art, and that it would obviously be Winslow Homer, who we saw before painting the same subject of a fox in a snowy landscape. Now, N.C. Wyeth's Fox in the Snow is a little bit different. Not only is he thinking about this painting that came several decades before his, but he's also thinking about Henry David Thoreau, who is presumably this figure over here on that distant hill. It almost looks like he and the fox are looking at each other. They're sort of communing with each other in this moment. There's a sense of silence here, right? Well, N.C. Wyeth loved Thoreau's writings. He loved Walden, and Thoreau wrote a lot about foxes that he observed when he was living in nature. For him, they were emblematic of the natural world's mystery and resilience. And so there's something a little bit magical about a fox. So we see N.C. Wyeth just seizing that notion, and it's almost as though he created a companion piece to his idol Winslow Homer's famous painting from the late 19th century over here. I love how they almost look like they should be hung together this way. Now we're going to shift gears and take a look at work by N.C. Wyeth's son and grandson. So N.C. Wyeth had tremendous success as an illustrator, but it was his son, Andrew Wyeth, who became a famed fine art artist. And so his works tend to be much more muted, subdued in color, less narrative, and sometimes they can just be astonishing in their relative simplicity. This is called By the Lower Dam from 1967, and we can see we're sort of sitting alongside the trunk of this seemingly huge tree that juts off at this striking angle. And it seemed to be in the midst of a snowstorm here, right? There is something a little bit awe-inspiring, maybe even a little bit terrifying about this scene. It kind of reminded me of the Sea of Ice and Caspar David Friedrich, like we saw before, even with that really restrained color palette there. Now, with this kind of virtuoso brushstroke, he's able to suggest things like the bark on the tree just so effectively. Now, Andrew Wyeth, for the most part, really does love these kind of muted tones, these somber compositions. And he oftentimes painted his own property, his neighbor's property, and his neighbors. In this case, we are looking at Andrew Wyeth's property, and we can see it just looks so grim, doesn't it? And really, the world can look like a lot like this in the final weeks of the year, but we see like all these bare branches, everything just looks brown. But we also see this absolutely gorgeous, kind of dazzlingly bright Christmas tree. Now, this is a dry brush watercolor that we're looking at here, and I don't know how he did it, but this tree looks like it is actually illuminated. Apparently, he would put like a zillion lights on his Christmas tree. We can even see a little bit of the reflection here in the water below. This is called The Last Light from 1988. And in this case, he's referring to the brevity of the day, really the shortness of the day at this time of year, but also the brevity of the holiday season. This could be the last time he lights up this tree. The tree on the pole was actually something in Andrew Wyatt's yard. Here is a picture of his property and his Christmas tree on top of a pole. Here's a photograph of the artist from later on in life. And we can see him standing in front of a Christmas tree. There's something about these big brass buttons on his coat in this kind of inverted V shape that just kind of complements that Christmas tree so well. This photograph was taken by his granddaughter, Virginia, and she called it My Christmas Elf because he was, after all, N.C. Wyeth's son, and he loved to celebrate Christmas just as much as his father did. His traditions were just a little bit different, I think, and he kind of leaned into the mischief part of it, as we'll see. So here is another painting by Andrew Wyeth featuring the Christmas tree on top of a pole. I haven't mentioned yet why the Christmas tree on top of the pole. Well, maybe the best we can kind of come up with in terms of an explanation for that is that many of his neighbors were of German descent, and there might have been some sort of German tradition that was like this. That's the best we can come up with. In this picture, this is called Crescent, again, kind of referring to the brevity of the holiday season, because of course the moon is going to get bigger every night. And with every day that passes, the needles on this tree are going to get drier and drier and start falling off. And then the holidays are over. So there's this reference to the passage of time here, but this is such a striking composition. It's almost as though it's like cut in half along the strong diagonal. And we see this snowy landscape and almost abstract renderings of the natural world, these tall grasses, these bare branches. It just seems very loosely painted. And then this incredible detail in terms of like the grain of the wood of this shed-like structure here in the foreground. It's amazing to me. Even the way he's painted these woven baskets here, it's beautiful. Now, we can also see maybe a little bit of an association with that crescent moon and all the handles on the baskets up above. In the end, it's I would say a really remarkable picture. And we've got that beautiful Christmas tree right there at the heart of it. I have just one last Christmas tree for you from Andrew Wyeth. And he always, well, he thought of this picture as sort of his magnum opus. This is called Snow Hill from 1989. And if you're an Andrew Wyeth fan, you might even recognize a few of these figures. Well, if you're an Andrew Wyeth fan, you probably know who they all are. But these are figures that were familiar in the world of the Wyeths because these were his neighbors. These were his most frequent models. And so this painting of his most frequent models dancing around this maypole with a Christmas tree on top of it. What is this about? Well, in his 70s, Andrew Wyeth imagined that he would be dying soon. And he also imagined that his models would be celebrating that. Apparently, it was very taxing, both physically and psychologically, to pose for Andrew Wyeth. So here they are having a great big party at his demise. So, so the title here is a reference to literature, so sort of like father, like son in this case. Andrew Wyeth is referring to Melville's classic with the name Snow Hill, specifically that line, there she blows, a hump like a snow hill. It's Moby Dick. So like I said, a really important work for this artist too. So we round out our look at the Wyeths with just one last fox in the snow. And of course, Jamie Wyeth, the youngest, the third generation here, and the youngest son of Andrew Wyeth, is an active painter today, and he's thinking about where he fits in all of this. And so he oftentimes creates works that are in response to this family legacy of the arts and the places that they lived, and even this relationship back to Winslow Homer, who's sort of like the granddaddy of all of them, although not a blood relative. So in this case, his Island Fox from 2013 is also engaging with these blackbirds or these crows. In fact, it looks like there's been a little bit of a skirmish. The snow's been disturbed. The fox itself looks like it's wet, maybe even breathless, but he is sitting down and on high alert as these birds sort of swoop and circle. Maybe they're coming back, maybe they're going away. We don't quite know. But once again, we have a Wyeth artist who is exploring this notion of the resilience and the mystery of these foxes and how they survive in these very cold New England landscapes. So I lied, that's not our last Wyeth. This is our last Wyeth. It's our Jamie Wyeth painting called Catching Snowflakes from 2004. This is a portrait of his wife, Phyllis. I think it's sort of Phyllis as a young woman because I think when she was younger, she used crutches like this. And here she is wearing this fantastic hat with the flower in it and the scarf and the winter coat. We can tell it's already cold. It's wintertime, but it hasn't snowed enough for any snow to accumulate. And it reminds us of just how fun and how beautiful it is to see those first few flakes, and how great it is to kind of let go and be childlike and try to catch one of them. My challenge for you this winter season is to do just that, and you will feel like a kid again. It will bring a smile to your face, and so will Norman Rockwell. That's what he's there for. And if Norman Rockwell doesn't, certainly the Santa that he painted will. Now, Norman Rockwell sort of needs no introduction. He had this 47-year-long career with the Saturday Evening Post, painted more than 320 covers for them. About 30 of them were Christmas covers. And in addition to that, he was painting calendars and cards and advertisements. That's what this is, an advertisement for Kellogg's. And so we just see Santa up close and personal, directly engaging us. Now you're in the privacy of your own home. I challenge you to take on this facial expression. Open your mouth, smile broadly, lift up your eyebrows while you're doing it. And it is such a sweet, joyful pose. Like you can't help but feel like you're having fun. Now, N.C. Wyeth gave us these kind of quiet Santas sneaking around, delivering presents. Norman Rockwell gives us a Santa that just simply delivers joy. It's not even about the presents, it's just about the fun. And so that is what he's so good at conveying in so many of his winter and Christmas scenes. We have the ice skating grandpa here who is kicking back that foot with the skate on it, literally skating in circles around this frozen pond. His grandson here and the dog have paused to watch him, and the look on his face is sort of like that expression of like, I still got it. And I'm impressed because, like I said, it's not easy. You're probably already thinking of that skating minister that we saw before. Well, Norman Rockwell's made him quite a lot more jovial, right? He doesn't have any of the seriousness of the minister. It is all fun. And just in terms of the way the dates work, I think Norman Rockwell came up with this figure before he had even seen the skating minister, which is kind of interesting to me. So Rockwell loved the contrast of old and young. And here we have the Jolly Postman from right around mid-century. This was a Hallmark card. And we can see the mailman here wearing this kind of dull gray uniform. And maybe the work is a little bit dull too, but it's certainly enlivened by the holiday season. We can see that he's delivering all these cards, all of these festively wrapped packages, and there's all of this like red and green that's like punches up this picture and moves your eye around and makes it so fun. Notice how broadly these children are smiling. It's almost like a caricature in some cases, but you can tell our mailman here really enjoys his newfound rock star status here amongst the kids. He's getting a kick out of it. And we can see that Rockwell is really leaning into just keeping the setting, the background, pure white. He lets us imagine the context for this. That probably running down the street, maybe there are houses in the background, but he just lets us imagine it. One thing that he does do to kind of embed them into the scene is he just adds in these little white dots as snowflakes here. And I just think it's a subtle move. It's an effective one. I like it a lot. So a route that this mailman probably would have known very well is Main Street Stockbridge at Christmas time. This was painted in 1967. This is, of course, the small town in Western Massachusetts where Norman Rockwell spent like the last quarter century of his life. If you're a big Norman Rockwell fan, you might even be able to spot this little red building all the way over on the right. That was his studio. It's now on the grounds of the Norman Rockwell Museum. Now, downtown Stockbridge, downtown, has not changed a lot in since the years that he painted it. It's this idyllic small town life. And here it is at Christmas time. We see children playing in the road. We see all of these little Christmas trees throughout the downtown, garlands and wreaths and that sort of thing, and people going about their business, bringing home Christmas trees and the presents that they shopped for. Now, I love to compare this picture to an actual photograph of the same place from just a few years ago. And you can see that Rockwell, I mean, he perfectly captured the detail of the architecture here. It's really kind of astonishing. And that Stockbridge hasn't changed that much. He did, however, kind of beef up those Berkshire mountains in the background just to give us, just that added level of quaintness. You can really see all of like the candles in the windows and the Christmas trees and that sort of thing here, and just all of the people on the sidewalk. Now, if we zoom back out for a moment, we can see we're looking at another panorama. We already saw one from N.C. Wyeth, who focused his major work there on the history of Christmas. And Norman Rockwell gives us present day, sort of shined up and looking as idealized as possible, possibly. But it's so sweet, right? It almost looks like a little scene from a snow globe that you would like to shake up a little bit just to see the snow falling. Now, it's an unusual work for Rockwell because he would typically focus on figures and a narrative. And so let's switch back to one of those kinds of paintings where the details really serve the narrative. This is called The Discovery from 1956. And this is a picture that's all about the details. The boy in his rumpled pajamas, the fact that he's looking through his father's bureau here. He's got the pipe and the shoe shine brushes, just the details of the middle class home too. I love the paneled door, the banister out here, the potted plant on the windowsill with just a little bit of a pop of red back there. But really, the little boy's face is like this, the showstopper, right? He's engaging us directly. He looks surprised, shocked. He's in disbelief because he's gone through his father's drawers. He's found a package. He opened this package that was tied in string, and he found the Santa suit. And he's looking at us with just disbelief. We also noticed that Rockwell has added in a few of those little white dots. They were snowflakes in the Jolly Postman, but here they are, the mothballs, right? So this is like an alternative kind of bizarro setting of a Christmas morning. And it got Rockwell into a little bit of hot water because there were plenty of subscribers to the Saturday Evening Post that did not want to have this conversation with their little ones. So Rockwell continued to make good use out of adorable faces of children, and we can see that in this next image here. This is called Merry Christmas Grandma from 1951. I love this picture. So this beautiful family of five has just walked through Grandma's front door. Notice they've all got the snow on their boots here, but they're all carrying festively wrapped presents. And you can imagine that Grandma is actually at the top of this set of stairs here. It almost looks like the mother here is looking right up at her. The little boy is shouting up to her, and the dog has gotten to them first in order to say hello. Now, this is an advertisement, and you'll never believe what this is an advertisement for. It's for Plymouth cars. Rockwell didn't even have to paint a car. Instead, what he shows is kind of the highest and best use of a car, basically a tool to get you safely to your loved ones so you can be together during like the most important times of your life. It's really such a beautiful notion here that he decided to omit the car. Now, Rockwell is so good at these reunions. That brings us back to that image that we saw on the title slide. This is his Christmas homecoming from 1948, and it really is his because we can see Norman Rockwell right here with his signature pipe and bow tie. It was a cover for the Saturday Evening Post, but there's hardly any Christmas in it to speak of. We see a little bit of a Christmas tree in the background, some festively wrapped presents here at the center, but otherwise it's all about human connection, the joy of reunion here. This is Rockwell's oldest son, who we see from behind. This was his wife. This was their middle son here, and this was their youngest son over on the far left. Now, Rockwell sort of punctuated the foreground with these three children, and I would say they're very well-behaved children. They're all standing there with their hands clasped, kind of taking in this joyous scene, and they kind of helped bring us into it too. Rockwell said this little girl in red was just so adorable. He decided to paint her twice. He gave her a twin, which I think is so sweet. And the rest of the people observing this homecoming, well, we've got this great slice of humanity. We've got his actual family and friends, people young over here with the baby, and old over here with the grandma. And this isn't just any grandma. This is Grandma Moses. And Grandma Moses and Norman Rockwell were, in fact, friends. They were practically neighbors. It's so funny to think of these two major artists of the 20th century being buddies. We can see them here from the following year celebrating. This must have been Grandma Moses's, I want to say it was probably close to her 90th birthday. That makes sense, 89th birthday. So so Rockwell said that when he knew her, she was a white-haired little woman like a lively sparrow. So we're going to use this as our segue to a section that looks just at Grandma Moses. Her name was Anna Mary Robertson Moses. I think Grandma Moses was some really good branding. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We can see that she wasn't just on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. She also made it to the cover of Time magazine. Sort of fascinated by the fact that they used an illustrator to paint her and didn't include one of her paintings on the cover. She became an icon, right? So when she was in her 70s, she decided that she would stay out of mischief after her husband died by taking up painting. And so she created these charming folk paintings, like the one that we see over here on the right, which is in the collection of the Smithsonian. It's a great little instructive painting about Grandma Moses, because if we zoom in here, she is actually in the car, and she is heading to New York City to see her work in her first official exhibition. So it's a fairly early painting for her. Now, Grandma Moses, it's just fascinating to think about why she became such a phenomenon, because there were so many cards and calendars and puzzles of her work. People really gravitated towards what she produced. Now, I think part of that might have to do with sort of where in the 20th century this fell, post World War II, and at a time when avant-garde art was particularly challenging. You can imagine that there were all of these Americans who just thought, give me something wholesome, give me something familiar. And Grandma Moses, she painted her memories of working on farms as she was growing up. So that's what she delivered. And when I said there's good branding here, I think there was really good branding. During the Great Depression, this picture of Whistler's mother, James Abbott McNeill Whistler, this picture toured the US and people loved it. They really gravitated towards this idea of like a stalwart mother, maybe a little bit puritanical as well. And so we can see it was just about 5 years after it toured through the country that Grandma Moses picked up this brush and kind of became America's spunky grandma who could paint. And we can see her here very consciously creating a similar picture in photograph form. So let's take a look at her paintings. This is called The Checkered House. She painted it many times over her career. It would have been a landmark that was very close to where she lived, but not one that she could look at because the checkered house had burned down like 40 years before she even started painting. So this was just something that loomed large in her memory, and she goes back to it again and again. In this case, she paints it during winter, and we can see all of these little horse-drawn carriages. It's really hard to imagine that they're all running around and nobody is running into each other. But we also see these figures that kind of look like soldiers. The checkered house was used as a location for a revolutionary general. And so she kind of refers to that in her pictures. Notice too, the kind of naive approach to perspective, especially with the way the checkered house is rendered. She uses that pattern to kind of flatten out the whole house. Even though we're seeing it at this angle here, the pattern and the windows are all presented frontally. So the scale, the perspective, it's all a little bit off, but it adds to the charm, right? Now, we already saw N.C. Wyeth use a little bit of Revolutionary era history to tie into Christmas, and we see Grandma Moses kind of similarly pulling from U.S. history to add to her paintings as well. Now, some of her best paintings are scenes of people just out having fun in the winter season. And in this case, we have even more horse-drawn carriages, at least one, two, three, maybe four, maybe there's a fifth up here. It's hard to, maybe a sixth over here. They just keep popping out of the woodwork. But this is another scene that's sort of densely populated with figures in the lower section here. You can tell that's sort of where she starts. And we have children playing. They're building a snowman. They're playing games over here on the right, a decorated house over on the left. And then in the middle ground, this frozen pond with skaters on it. And then this beautiful sort of snow-covered hill and a church that looks like it's completely snowed in. And if this composition is reminding you of something we already looked at, I would put money on the fact that Grandma Moses was referring to this painting. By all accounts, she wasn't studying art history as she was painting, but something tells me she might have seen this, particularly with the frozen lake over here and how similarly it's placed in the composition to Bruegel. Now, I also sort of think that she might have chosen to cover this church in snow to maybe refer to the Alps that we see up above. This painting is called White Christmas. It was actually purchased by Irving Berlin, who was the writer of the song White Christmas. He had written it about a decade earlier. Now, Grandma Moses is so tied into so many aspects of American culture. This is her illustrated version of Clement Moore's The Night Before Christmas. Might be familiar to a lot of you because Captain Kangaroo apparently read this version of the text on his TV program for like years. So I think somehow I've like internalized these images too, and I don't think I've ever seen Captain Kangaroo. Now, at first, Grandma Moses resisted this commission because she said all of her paintings are about her memories. She didn't want to paint anything that was like fantasy. But in the end, she'd like memorized the poem. She was ready to do it. She was at the ripe old age of 100, and she illustrated this book with all of these little charming elements and Santa just going right down the chimney there. So in the time that we have left, yikes, just a moment or two, I wanted to share with you just a couple of examples of artist Christmas cards. And here we're starting off with Andrew Wyeth. We can see he is like a little mischievous elf. Can you imagine just getting an original work of art from an artist friend of yours? So he gives us elves, hanging from the boughs of branches, climbing down this ladder here from this lantern, and then the familiar crescent moon up there. So he was a Christmas elf. It makes sense that he would paint the same thing. Even Pablo Picasso made some Christmas cards. This is from 1959, and he created his Père Noël, several versions of him. And his Santa doesn't really, well, his Santa looks a little bit more like a clown than a Santa. Big red nose, not quite really a stocking cap. And I just love these very confident black lines that he uses to describe like the hair and the beard. And then even those wild eyebrows kind of reminded me a little bit of Rockwell's Santa. And I'm sure Picasso would have never admitted being influenced by Norman Rockwell, but I'm just putting it out there. He might have been. We also have the chance to peek at these Christmas cards designed by Andy Warhol. He was commissioned to make these by Tiffany and Company. These are kind of delicate, they're sweet, they're feminine. He's leaning more into the pinks than the reds. So we've got this lovely little Christmas tree, the baubles here, each one kind of uniquely patterned. And then this wreath that's not made up of evergreens, but of little green butterflies. There's just something so charming about that. Um, and maybe even a little influential, because this next artist we're going to see also painted butterflies for Christmas, but Warhol did it first. Salvador Dali was actually commissioned by the greeting card company Hallmark to create a set of Christmas cards. I think it was right around 1948. And so here we are looking at one of them. He's created an absolutely enormous surrealist Christmas tree, way over life size. We've got these tiny figures here in the foreground, and it is composed out of butterfly and moths. Now, this is what surrealism is really all about. It's like the illogical combination of objects. And in this case, it just kind of rubbed people the wrong way. The American public didn't really want surrealist Christmas cards, as it turned out. But I will show you one more. This is a strange one, too. This is a sort of a distorted looking Santa who is kind of embedded in the snow here with a tiny figure in the foreground looking on. And Santa is opening up these drawers that are that are part of his body, really. And inside is a rabbit and Dali's signature melting clocks. Now, the second I saw this, I knew Dali was ripping off Rockwell. All roads lead back to Rockwell, right? But in this case, Rockwell has this whole history of painting Santas and grandpas falling in the snow in a similar way. And I find it really hard to believe that Dali wasn't taking a note from him. So we'll wrap up this very quick look at artist Christmas cards with a personal Christmas card from Georgia O'Keeffe. This is a painting that she did when she was really kind of just starting off as an artist. This is Starlight Night from 1917. She went back and she used this image for her own personal Christmas cards in 1963. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe was not religious in the institutional sense, but she was very spiritual. And I think that this is such a spiritual image. It's deceptively simple. The suggestion of the stars in the night sky by just creating this kind of grid pattern here with the looseness and the bleeding brushstrokes in this watercolor. It's gorgeous and it reminds us of Silent Night, right? It's a great way to round things out. But I promised you a happy new year too. So we've had our Christmas time. We are thinking about the very end of the year now, and I have just one last image for you. Again, it's Norman Rockwell, and it's Happy New Year 1945 on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. And at this point, the balls dropped. People have thrown their confetti, they've had their champagne, and they've gone home. The only person left is the waiter who has to contend with the mess. But I brought in this image because it's a good reminder to all of us that the holiday season is so short. And we only have like what, a week, maybe two left before we're all singing Old Lang Syne. And we put away the cookies and the decorations and the carols for another year. So it's short. Enjoy it. Happy holidays, everyone. I will end there for now, and I welcome any questions or comments that you have about the works that we looked at. And my goodness, what an arts loving community here, because you already have way more questions than any other group I have shown this to. So I'm going to start off with the Q&A here. Somebody asked, will the recording be sent? I believe so. The webinar was set up by the Chelmsford Public Library. So if for some reason you don't get the recording within 24 hours, I would follow up with Chelmsford. And let's see here. Karen says, are the paintings named by the artists? Great question, Karen. Generally speaking, I think in the world of fine art, they are. I'm not sure about the commercial art. Maybe as I'm thinking about NCY. My hunch is there might have been some editorial considerations there for some of them too. So that's a really good question that, the titles are shaping the way we read them, and they might not have always been just named by the artist. Karen also asked, the disco ball painting, did the artist say it was supposed to be snow? Another great question, Karen. I'm going to go back to my notes on this one because I just wanted to double check the title of the painting. Let's see here. The title of the painting is Winter Landscape. And just to get everybody on the same page here, because Karen, you just made me really question why I put this picture in. This is Winter Landscape by Kandinsky. So you ask a great question. Is it really snow? And we can rely at least on the title as we know it to be a winter landscape. Um, and Judith asks, in the Kandinsky painting, is there an arm hanging out of a yellow shirt in the sky? Now that's a question. Hold on. Let me look for this. I'm not sure I see it. But this is abstract and it's fun to sort of imagine or like create these associations with things that sort of seem familiar. So there could be something that looks a lot like that. I'm not sure I see it, but thank you for your question, Judith. Dee says, what is the black in the upper right corner of Homer's painting of the fox? Let's see if we can find that. The black in the upper right. That is this flock of blackbirds. There are two hovering up in the sky here, and then more of them sort of coming up over this hill. Judith, made a great connection here to that crescent moon. Yes, because Andrew Wyeth painted it and N.C. Wyeth. We had the crescent moon figuring in here with N.C. Wyeth. Great connection. And then it seems to be kind of a major focus for Andrew Wyeth over here. Thanks for bridging that, Judith. And then we have Deborah who says, please elaborate on Blackbird symbolism in the artwork. Well, it looks like you might have shared a good link on that subject. And I'm just looking at the link here that says Blackbirds meaning death. I would say that that's probably pretty accurate without even clicking on the link. They're certainly threatening the fox in that picture. And I would say probably in the history of art, yeah, if you paint a blackbird in, there's something ominous about it. But thanks for raising that subject and making that just a little bit more clear too. Somebody else asks, in the painting of the boy in PJs, Rockwell's signature is script, but in others it has been a stencil style. Did he use others as well? Great question. I am fascinated by Rockwell's changing signature as well. There we get sort of this block print that almost looks like a stamp. And then we see something that looks a little bit more like a signature, but we see a more kind of careful stylized cursive here. So I'm not sure if there's any rhyme or reason as to why he chose one signature over another. And as far as I understand, he sort of switched back. If anybody knows anything more about that, I've tried to look into this myself, but I've kind of come up empty. Apparently, I need to write a paper on it. um, so thanks for pointing out how that signature changes. And again, if somebody has some good info on that, please share. Somebody asks, did Grandma Moses have formal painting lessons? As far as I know, she did not. She had been doing, I think, some sort of work with fiber, maybe some like embroidery, and then just decided that that painting sort of lasted longer. She was using house paint sometimes for her pictures. So I think she just kind of took what she knew in terms of composition and color from her work with fiber or textile, and then she translated that to painting just with her own instincts. Uh, Annika asks, in the painting of the unsuccessful rabbit hunters, looking over the people on ice, what are the women with the fire to the left of the hunters up to? Oh, I should have brushed up on that. Let's go back to that. Let's see here. All right, the fire. Yes, what are they doing? I had this in my notes. Let me see if I can go back to this. This is my hunch is that they're like cooking something, but I just want to double check. I should double check before I say something. Um, I'm not sure I'm able to find it quickly, and I'm sorry I don't have, oh wait, maybe this is it. It says the returning hunters, their villagers with a roaring fire preparing roasting of a pig. The sign on the inn that's hanging askew there, I guess it depicts a stag. So that's some additional information. But I guess they're getting ready to roast a pig, and that would be the sign of the inn. Um, Great question. Great attention to detail. Sorry, I didn't have that on the tip of my brain. Nancy says, thanks for sharing O'Keeffe's painting. I've never seen it before. What was the scale? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't think I have the dimensions in my notes, but somehow I always imagined those watercolors that she did just being um, a, a, a rather modest scale, maybe something like the size of a sketch pad. That's what I imagined, but I'd have to look it up in order to find the exact dimensions. The name of that work, I think, is Starlight Night, if you wanted to search for it. It is a beauty, isn't it? Somebody else asks, is there a blackbird in the first fox drawing? Yes. I think I sorry for the pause. I think you're referring to the Winslow Homer, and that those would be either blackbirds or crows. I don't even know if there's a difference between blackbirds or crows. Mary says, who was the artist who did the scene of the crippled man below the tree in the crucifixion? That is Caspar David Friedrich. Isn't that just gorgeous, Mary? Somebody else asks, said, do you know if Norman Rockwell would have been flattered by all the other artists who imitated his work, or who at least were inspired by his work? This is just me guessing about that, by the way. And I think he would have been tickled by it because I have a whole other program about how Norman Rockwell's work so oftentimes engages with the art world itself. I think he was aware of what else was happening in the art world, but he sort of stayed in his lane in order to, be a successful commercial illustrator. And I think that's what he enjoyed doing. But he liked sort of knowing what else was out there. And who wouldn't be flattered, right? If that was the case. Deborah, thanks for your kind words. And Diane says she sees the arm in that Kandinsky painting. We're all going to be looking for this arm. Um, Maybe up here somewhere. I'm not sure. Marianne says, are there any more Wyatt's painting as a fourth generation? I don't think so, Marianne. Maybe we could hope for some nieces or nephews. But I don't know if there's anybody else waiting in the wings. Jamie Wyeth, as I understand it, does not have any children. But Andrew Wyeth had four brothers and sisters, so I'm not sure if any of their descendants are practicing artists. Somebody else said in Warhol's work there is a baby smoking something. Let's go to that. I thought of it as like a little angel. Let's see what's going on. Oh, maybe playing music. That's music. That's not a baby smoking something. But you made me look. So good one. Here we have somebody else who says in the painting where the boy was thrown aside his crutches. What is the orange light in his hand? Oh my goodness, you guys are getting really good at looking at art because I'm not sure I noticed anything in his hand. Let's go back to that. So I just did, okay, I see what you're saying. It does look like there's something orange there. I just imagined that as his hand, but you're sort of seeing that as a light. That's interesting. I don't know. You could probably read it both ways, but it's interesting to think that it could be a light. Um, let's see. Oh, Nancy shared the proportions of that Georgia O'Keeffe. It's like the standard sheet of copy paper. Thank you. And somebody says they mistook the note for smoke. Okay. I'm switching over to the chat now, which seems like it was sort of going fast and furious while I was talking. So I'm sorry I didn't stop in there before. Oh, people are saying that these are mittens here, maybe, and that the figure is praying. I do get the sense that there's prayer, but it's funny, you don't necessarily, yeah, yeah, it's probably hands raised in prayer. They would be like right in front of his face. It really seems like he's praying hard if that's the case, right? Let's see here. Aniki, thank you for your kind words. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and examining these pictures so closely. All these great questions. I love it. Oh, Adair says it used to snow a great deal in Virginia in the 1600s. Thank you for sharing that. I should not have questioned NCY. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for all the kind words that I'm seeing here. It is always such a pleasure to share these programs with you. This month was a little bit lighter, a little bit more festive. I hope you're all feeling a little bit more joyful for the holidays. Thank you again for spending your evening with me, and I look forward to seeing you next month on the 30th. If not sooner, you can always go to my website and find more links to more free programs like this one. Thank you, everybody. I am very grateful for all of you, and I wish you all a very happy holiday season. Take great care. Bye.